Hello, hello, and welcome to the Land Down Under Hangout group. We are a book club who review lots of other things, mostly in the sci-fi and fantasy genres. And today is my pick, and I picked a novel, a classic sci-fi novel, 2001 by Arthur C. Clarke, written or published in 1968. Um, I wanted to go around and get overall thoughts, but I also wanted to put into everyone's brains a bit of a plan of attack on it. So I thought that we could have overall thoughts, and then I thought we could talk to the sections. We've got the mission to the moon, Dawn of Man, mission to the moon, mission to Jupiter, and rebirth. And then there's some interesting areas within that, some subsections that I think are interesting regarding the tech, the characters, the influence of the time it was written, and the movie, of course, and what how we felt like the two compared and enhanced or didn't enhance our experience. So I'll start because it's my pick. So look, overall, I enjoyed it. This is my second Arthur C. Clarke novel. I read Rendezvous with Rama during the pandemic, and I'm going to be honest, Rendezvous with Rama is a better novel. But I think what I read in this was the scaffolding and some of the things that he wanted to explore as he moved forward, and realizing what he's kind of better at, which is I certainly got by the end of it going, okay, I think you're figuring out what you're kind of what you're more interested in here. I had watched the movie a few times, and I found that this novel really enhanced my understanding of it in a really good way. It wasn't like it's a completely different thing, but there's aspects of the movie that are so tenuous, ambiguous, and not in a like not like Donnie Darko where it's kind of like, oh, it's the mystery, but it's almost like art wank, if I'm honest. I don't really know how. And I felt like with this, especially as you kind of come into those last two sections, especially the last section, the rebirth, I was like, oh, this isn't just like explaining it. There's a whole like the what is going on, but also the why. And I felt like actually that was really cool. And I look forward to talking about that with all of you soon. I I'm glad I read it, but I don't need to read it again. Interestingly, I've wanted to kind of come back to Rendezvous with Rama at some point, but I don't actually feel I even need to go into this. And some of that is, as we'll talk into, I think there's actually some structural issues in this that'll be interesting to kind of talk to. And yeah, let's go around. So I'm going to start with, I think Elizabeth, you only touched upon it, so maybe we start with you, and
Yeah,
then
sure.
you can kind of go. That's where I got to.
Yeah. So, yeah, I didn't get very far through it. I think I pretty much only finished the first section with the Neanderthals. I have read the book before, but it's been like about 25 years since I read it last, so memory is not great. Um, so most of my thoughts are kind of more invested in the kind of larger narratives around it. Um, the way it's kind of so permeated. It's like classics are become so permeated in the culture that it becomes hard to see their influence because it's so pervasive in a way. Um, and otherwise, just some general thoughts about the problematic nature of Arthur C. Clarke himself and his kind of legacy to the science fiction community more broadly. So yeah, I'm mostly here for the popcorn and looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Excellent. Mel, did you finish?
I would say I did a full skim read of roughly 50% across the whole book. I did not read
Well
it.
done. Well done.
So
I thought of you when you said you would do this because it is an Arthur C. Clarke book, and that means it is not a character-driven narrative.
No, it is not a character-driven narrative. It is not my kind of story. Honestly, the best takeaway I have for it is I actually think that it makes the movie worse. And I really love the movie, so that's saying something for me. I felt like the gaps, it filled in a lot of gaps. I did not enjoy that filling, is what I would basically say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah. I can see everyone on the top line. Lisa.
This is my second reading of the book. The first time I read it was in 2001 because it was
That's very cool.
a thing. Everyone's like, yeah, read 2001.
Yep.
I had tried to watch the movie before then in like the 90s, I think, and didn't get it. And gave up before I actually got to the space bit. And then the second time I watched it was in 2001, and I really enjoyed the film. And I really enjoyed the book so much that I went on and read the other two.
Mm-hmm.
I was a lot younger. Yeah, the other two books. At that
more
point,
books.
Yeah, 2010 and
2061.
2061. Yeah.
And 3001 as well now.
I can't say I looked. I'm so sorry. I just can't say that I looked. So I'm sorry to interrupt like that.
Yeah. So if it's not your thing, you're not going to look. It's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I was a lot younger, so I was just I want to read science fiction. I think this time I read it, I had to kind of ignore more than I like of the things that are like, this is of its time, which is okay, but is not okay, a little bit. So yeah, but if I ignored that, I really did enjoy the story, and I agree with Sarah that I like the bits where there's a bit more of the why, because the movie is totally a Kubrick, and it's I feel like it's meant to leave you guessing and meant to disturb you, and I'm like, I'm not necessarily looking for that in a book. So I appreciated that about reading the book a second time. Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Kristen.
I liked it more than I thought I would because I do not like the movie. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to go with this. But it did actually, I found it made the movie make more sense to me. I still don't like the movie. Matt's probably shaking his head at me. I get it's pretty, right? Like, and I get what you mean exactly about the art wank, right? I'm like, that is exactly what it is. It's an art. It's like something you'd see in an art gallery in one of those little theaters they have in an art gallery, because it's very visual, and like, it's, I don't know. I'm very much more story driven and character driven, but I did find that this book had more of the story than the movie did. Like, it made more sense to me, and I could at least understand like more what was going on. It helped that it was short, probably too, like that I wasn't like, because the movie's so long. We watched it last night because we'd only just finished reading the book, and we're like, I do want to rewatch the movie before now having read the book. And I was falling asleep. I was so
it took me 3 nights to get through the illegal put together snippets on YouTube. Someone had grabbed bits of it, and there were a few bits missing, but mostly it was there. It took me 3 nights to plod through it.
I was like, we're already tired. I've had a really big week this week, and I was like, oh man, I'm having trouble.
Yeah, by the time you get to the Stargate, you'll be like, I am a zombie.
Yeah, but I do think that the book helped me understand more what was going on. And even as I was reading it, I listened to the audiobook, I was like, oh, that's what was going on in that part of the movie. So I did like that. I did find the preface really interesting. That I don't know if everybody had the same version as the audiobook one that I listened to, but it had like the author talking about the writing of it, which I did not know that he and Kubrick basically had sat down and had a meeting, and that he decided to write this book because Kubrick wanted to make the movie of something like this. And then I didn't know any of that. I assumed he'd written the novel and then they'd made the movie later. So I didn't know that those things sort of had been planned out at the same time. I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I'm getting a little bit too detailed. I didn't love it, but I'm glad I read it. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
No,
Yeah.
I think that's certainly my feeling. I enjoyed it, but not enough to kind of,
It's not making me put Arthur C. Clarke on the top of my
Yeah.
reading for other books. Let's put it that way.
yeah. Matt,
Me.
yeah.
Yeah, very similar to I think just about everyone else. I quite enjoyed the book. I had I think the same issues that just about everyone else I think has had with it so far. In terms of some of those attitudes and things of the 60s, and it's like, wow, with 40 years down the track and it still hasn't changed. It's 2001, so great. Yeah, I this is the kind of story that I really actually like a lot. I like in one of my, sci-fi tropes that I really enjoy is that thing of like discovering a more advanced civilization and what that means and how it plays out. It's a type of story that I really enjoy reading. So from that perspective, I enjoyed it a lot more. If that makes sense, I enjoyed I really liked the concept. I think I just liked the book, if that kind of makes some sense.
Yes.
Like Kirsten said, we also watched the movie last night. I'd seen the movie several times before. We own a copy, so it was very easy for us to just watch. I also liked that it sort of enhanced that understanding of section in the movie that I didn't understand as well previously, or my interpretation of it was not the same as what the novel version was. It was the first time I'd read the book as well, so even though I'd seen the movie like 3 or 4 times, I hadn't read the book up until now. So that was kind of interesting to bring that understanding in, which I think helped. I don't know if I'd say it detracted from the movie or made my experience of the movie any worse. But I think what it did highlight to me was the places where the book and the movie diverge became quite apparent. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I know the reason for some of those things, and I don't know the reasons for some of the others. So, but overall, I enjoyed it. I'll probably watch the movie several times again in the future. I don't think I'll be rereading the novel. But yeah, we'll talk more about that.
Thanks, Matt. Chris.
Yeah, okay. So this is the first time I've read the book in over 20 years. So I have read, I think I've read all of Odyssey. I may not have read 2010. And whether or not I like the first book's a hard thing to say, because for me, Clarke's writing style is particularly difficult. He's what I would refer to as a very visual writer. He likes to use analogs in visual reference, which is not easiest for me to process. That said, his writing in the later books does improve, and of course, the last book was not written by him solely, and there's a lot more character driven. The thing that I found particularly interesting this time around was actually looking with a lot more context about the world, because when I last read it, I was in my teens. A lot more context about the world and what has happened, and seeing his predictions, remembering that, of course, he wrote the book before Apollo actually reached the moon. Spaceflight was in its infancy, and so there was a lot of prediction going on. And it's interesting to see where he hit it and where he missed it horribly. In terms of the movie, of course, I've seen the movie far too many times. It was one of my father's favorites. And as similarly, it was one of the first hard science fiction movies of the time, which I think helped contribute to his love and my early exposure to it. So, like I said, it's hard to say if I like it or not. Certainly, I like the universe. I've read too much of it not to. But yeah, about the individual books, it's very hard to say anything in particular.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Lissa.
I got the 2001 Millennial Edition, so I also got to read that the book and the screenplay were written at the same time. I find that fascinating because I had no idea. This will show my age, but I saw 2001: The Space Odyssey at age 8 when it was first released in 1968. And I loved it. And I've seen it a number of times since. And it's funny you're talking about a bit like of the art wankery, but I think what it was the computer graphics back then were just so primitive that they couldn't do anything of like showing his travels through the universe and through, from the Milky Way to the whole thing and seeing all of creation. And if it were redone today, I think they could do a much better job of really capturing that part of the book. But because they captured it so poorly in the movie, the book really, really explained a lot of that quite well for me. I really enjoyed getting the clarification of what was going on in the end of the movie, because that was always like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. And to be fair, that's the bit that I'm talking about, Artway. I actually think the special effects, especially the slit light effect. Oh no, I love it. I think it still holds up. I think it still looks spectacular.
cool.
The bit I never liked was the oil and water trying to be the nebula, because it looks like oil and water.
Yeah.
But it's the bit where like where you said that end. It's when you end up in what we now know is more supposed to be a hotel room, or like
that they got from 1950s movies. And the other thing is, I'm pretty sure that the evolution of the ape man was closer to the like Australopithecine to Homo breakdown. This was the first time they used tools, and I was just so enthralled by those scenes back as a kid. It was just magical. And I really still got a lot of that feeling from the book, so I was really happy to read it. Never read it before. I've seen the movie a good handful of times.
Yeah. And what a special memory that you actually saw it in cinemas when it came out and were there for the zeitgeist of the experience. Yeah,
with my mom and dad, of all people.
I love it. I love it. That's very cool. Shane.
I really enjoyed it. Reading this was a delight. This was my first time reading the book. I've seen the movie at some point, probably a college film night in a huge auditorium crowded with smelly students. And I don't know how much I took in, but
were you a real student there?
I was going to say how much you took in.
How much of a student smelliness are we talking?
I feel like that would improve the movie.
It probably would have. No, this read was fun. I found it an easy read. I really enjoyed like the scale and the thoughtfulness. Looking at like, I'm a sucker for an info dump. And Clark thinking about how things work and big physics and astrophysics. And as you point out, just at the very start of the space race, and that was cool reading in the prologue and speculating through the book how much of that he was making up. And also the length of the book was a real pleasure compared to most books these days. Like, just nice, short, get to the point. So yeah, I had a lot of fun reading it. It was cool.
Great. Thanks so much, Shane.
So one thing that I forgot to mention. One of the last times we saw 2001 was with some friends and their 10-year-old son. And watching it with him these days, I realized how slow the movie is compared to movies these days. It was just like, it was incredible.
Yeah. It's something I suppose I can speak to it now around my rewatch and the mission to the moon sequence in the film, and part of why I think structurally they could actually have done away with that whole bit. Today you wouldn't even have that. It would actually be, I'll explain my idea, is that really is just about trying to explain to an audience of the 60s how different like lack of gravity and what the challenges would be. And that's what that is. That's all those things that Kubrick was messing around with and trying, and Clark was trying to figure out. It was like, this is because this is such a foreign concept of what it's like to be in space or to be on the moon. And I didn't know that, and I realized it was really it's of the time, it's just such an education, whereas now your 10-year-old friend was probably like, yeah, I know that's why. So yeah,
and it's amazing how much he got right about things like having a space station that spins to make artificial gravity. Like, we see that all the time, and it's like the fact that he wrote this before they'd even put a person on the moon, and
saying that our station does not spin.
And I was like, no, but like this is a concept you've seen like echoed throughout, like your future sci-fi stuff has got like a spinning space station so that the astronaut, and we were watching it and I was like, that thing's way too small.
I thought that too.
Gravity ship doesn't work when it's that small.
No.
But like the concept
does if you spin it fast enough.
Well, that's what I said. If you spin it fast enough, it would, but then it would not be fun.
And the Coriolis effect, which is, these are the things nobody knew that in the 60s.
Yeah,
and now we have this language because of the influence of it. So yeah. Let's talk Dawn of Man. I'm going to just give you some quick, and I'd love to know what everyone else thought. I never really enjoyed this part in the movie. It's really interesting because there's a couple of people, I think Mel said she loved it, and Liz really loved that part in the movie. I always hated that part. And in this book, I felt like we were definitely observers. Like, again, it's a plot-driven narrative, not a character. We're observing Moonwatcher and the world, but there was so much more that helped me understand actually what was supposed to be taking place. And I enjoyed like the kind of the time to take to understand the world. And when I watched the part, I'm like, God, this isn't even 10 minutes, and yet it felt really, really slow. Did I not get Lisa? I did get Lisa.
Yeah, you did. I was just checking. That was all.
Anyway, so what did other people think of the Dawn of Man sequence?
This was my favorite part of the book, which sounds really stupid, but I didn't get this bit in the movie. And I think it explained it really well. Like the whole bit where it was making them test things out and learn how to do things and stuff. That wasn't super clear in the movie. And in the movie, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, it's taught them to be violent. And obviously that's part of it. But it wasn't just that. It was like, like testing out what you can do and sort of planting seeds and stuff. I could have read a whole book from that part of it, because I felt like it's the only part that it's weird, but it was more character driven than any of the rest of the novel. You kind of got to know this Moonwatcher guy, and I actually gave a shit about him, and I wanted to keep reading more. And I didn't really care about any of the other characters later on in the book, but I really actually became quite invested with this little tribe. And I liked it. That was my favorite part of the book.
I find that hilarious because I'm complete opposite.
I really love the fact that they're just this little band, and there's very few humans. There's very few, Australopithecine at this point, and they're so vulnerable. A little bit of climate has changed. They're in a drought, and they could die out. There's 25 of them. They literally could die out, and if not for this little spark of intelligence, I can eat them. They don't have to eat me. And now we're this way too many, 8 billion, 10 billion of us, from this little spark. And I know that's not really what happened, but
we nearly did.
I mean, it kind of did, right? But
we nearly did die out.
No, but I mean, we didn't have a monolith that gave us that.
That we know of.
That we know of.
That's right. We haven't been to the dark side of the backside of the moon yet.
Yeah. Well, no one's admitting to it.
Still classified.
The thing that got me in that one, I mean, there's a few bits and pieces, but it was that there's a point at which he wrote something a lot. I can't remember exactly what the words were, but it was essentially like each generation was kind of doomed to have to like relearn everything. There was no passing on of knowledge, like unless because they didn't have language, either vocal or written, of course. And so whatever they learnt died with them, and unless whoever was left around had been there to experience it, that knowledge just disappeared. And I thought, yeah, well, that's kind of a crazy way to live at that time, considering how we as humans live now and how relatively simple it is for us to just, we just pick up language just by existing and hang around other people that talk. But that was not obviously always the case. And just I felt kind of like a sadness to that, of like whatever someone happened to learn in their probably a short life for most of them at that time, may well have just disappeared, and took a long time to get to the point where that didn't have to disappear. So
yeah, well, even like the way their thinking was shown, like not lack of perception of time exactly, but like less sophisticated perception of time, the less sophisticated memory, that sort of thing was interesting to see that portrayed in that section.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, I was curious as to how it reflects like the understanding at the time that it was written of like evolution, like how much the science has changed since then, if it has. Because I think that it has a little bit, and whether he stuck close to what the science
We know a lot more about hominid branching lines now than we did then.
Yeah.
So they had a very linear opinion of, Australopithecus, then Homo erectus, then Homo habilis.
They hadn't found Australopithecus yet. I think Lucy was discovered in
the 80s.
I actually remember that.
Maybe he thought it was Homo habilis or Homo erectus perhaps. But they had this sort of linear, because we hadn't discovered.
Well, it's interesting too then, because like in this section he talks about like this tribe is not the only tribe that is undergoing like those changes. There are other tribes in other parts of the world who are doing similar things.
They're probably the same species, but we'd had bands of like 30 or so. I guess the idea that we were upright apes first before our brains developed, and that's a new concept. At the point we sort of were hunched over little apes.
Yeah.
There.
I was in that case I was thinking like because he's got those different tribes of people undergoing these things with other obelisks, presumably. That kind of whether that kind of reflects the kind of more modern understanding with those branches that Lisa mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we now know that there were multiple hominid species on our planet.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we don't know that all of the obelisks tampered with them in the same way.
No, and there were other things that could have come in, like we know in science, which might have happened, in scientific understanding of, and I never say it right, Nathaniel. Someone help me with that,
Neanderthal.
Thank you. I can never say it. I don't know why. That the difference was that it came down to who was nomads and who was working, like, and I can't remember which way around because it's not my speciality, I'm sorry, but basically like that was whatever they weren't doing and our branch was, that was the thing. They were certainly intelligent, they were tool users, all these things. So I like your thought process there, that there might have been multiple monoliths, hitting all the apes, and there were some lemurs who were feeling
all
it somewhere
all
else.
the hominids, just all of them.
Yeah, the lemurs were trying it out in Madagascar. It was all happening.
I mean, it was explicit in the text that like these were not the only clan.
Yeah.
And the thing I found about that as well, Clark leverages the strength of a good science fiction writer of saying nothing. Where it's not necessary to explain every detail and make up every facet of your story. You can leave a large enough gap and let the reader fill it in for themselves.
Especially in a novel of that size, it's one of the wonderful things that keeps it so succinct.
I actually thought it was just the single monolith, and it was, I mean, given the apparent technology level of it, it could basically talk to everything on the planet at once.
Dang.
Maybe it just moved around, you know.
Do you mean like as in there was like the monolith had several what do you call them? Like remote terminals?
I was thinking like there was just one monolith and it was moved by its entities, and then
Oh.
same one that they put then on the moon 40 feet under, the same, exactly, like it was the speaker system that traveled around, because there's no, like you said, there's no as Chris said, they don't say how it got there or how it left again. So it could
actually, that kind of puts me in mind of Three Body Problem.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, carry on.
it's all good.
Hey, a story about people being contacted by a more advanced. Hey.
Yay!
Yay! We have a theme.
Is any other thoughts about Dawn of Man before we move on to Mission to the Moon?
I loved the fact that it highlighted which we now know, the sort of the thought, the abstract thought processes that we know probably did exist by looking at brain capacity and stuff, that the moon gazer was like, wanted to reach the moon and he realized he just had to find a tree tall enough. And I'm like, there's the problem solving, the abstract problem solving. Yeah. Yeah, I did like that. That makes me giggle internally.
If there was a tree tall enough, he would have made it too.
Oh, that's true.
It does have to be really tall.
Really tall.
And really strong.
Really strong.
Well, like, I mean, I feel like also that's the connection to when you jump from there and then journey to the moon. It's like, oh, well, we did reach the moon.
Yeah. There's that theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice pick up there. I didn't pick that up. I picked other things up. I didn't pick that one up. Nice one.
Yeah.
Nice one.
3 million years.
So Mission to the Moon. So this is
Bring
my
in the
least...
sexism. Oh, we too early?
Yeah. Yeah. So
looks like I finished reading it at the right point then.
Yeah, you really did. You really did. So as I said here, this is my least favorite part of the movie and the book. And I know that for a lot of people, like it's all that, like it's all the technology, but now I'm such a sci-fi fan that's a little bit like, oh, look at what I can do. Like in the movie, it's like, oh, look at what we can do. It's the special effects of the time as opposed to actually telling a story. It's just like, look at what we can do with our special effects. And I think the thing that I wrote down somewhere is that most people can only name two characters out of anything, and that is Dave, as he's known, or Bowman, and Hal. I could give less than a shit about Floyd. I didn't even remember his name.
Glad he died.
I liked
it doesn't help that Hayward has absolutely no relevance really in the first book.
He's in the second book.
Right,
Yes.
right. I do remember.
I feel for Frank Poole though. I will remember Frank.
I really
Poole.
feel for Frank Poole. Yeah. He was the red shirt of the whole experience.
I don't remember the names of the three people who never woke up.
No, but what I can tell you is that they were white and they were men.
Yes.
That I can tell you.
That's
And
the
so
next
pretty
section.
much everybody except for one poor female journalist who he just dismisses as he wanders past her.
And the flight attendant.
Oh, sorry, no, but they're not called flight attendants. They're called stewardesses.
Oh, okay.
Not, like they're stewardesses instead of flight attendants, which makes sense because they're attending to you during a flight, and that is, yes. So,
no, I decided to use the word flight attendant because I just couldn't stomach saying
Yeah.
Demeaning her that way. Even more so in the film where she has that mini skirt on that used to make me cringe.
Yeah.
Oh.
And actually in the film,
Zero
as
gravity.
I watched it,
No.
there's actually Kubrick did at least something, because in the space station there is a doctor who is female that talks to Floyd, and she does not exist in the book.
Is this the bit where he sits down and has the drink with them for like 5 minutes?
Yeah, for
I'm
whole
like,
expository reasons, but no other reason but expository.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's extremely condescending to all the women in the group, but happily gives all the credit to the male in the group.
Like just yeah, and actually Floyd's and it was affected by the movie. He's condescending to everybody, including the other scientists who are fucking living on the moon. I just really, it's like this guy. I mean, Chris, you liked him. I think you said, I like Floyd. Or is it like,
No.
is that right? No.
He says he's not relevant to the first book.
Might have said it.
Right.
Who said it?
I might have said it, but I meant Frank Poole.
Oh, Frank Poole.
Yeah, and we like Frank. Poor Frank.
That's fine.
That was later.
Yeah. His birthday.
He's there.
What is
Oh, yeah,
that?
I didn't wish death on him, but I wasn't that sad about it either.
Yeah, I didn't really know him much.
Yeah, I mean, Floyd's big contribution is to provide continuity, because unfortunately, of course, no one really survives with any knowledge of the mission other than a few people in mission control. And so he provides a tie to the next book.
Right.
What I find interesting is the whole idea of the illness, the epidemic on the moon, has so much different meaning having had COVID here.
Yeah.
Like,
I was like, you guys are really like, that's not a great cover story. It's a really bad cover story.
Was it? I don't know if it was in the movie, but am I remembering correctly? In the book, they talk about because they were talking about the epidemic, and they said something about how there was like a bird flu.
I vaguely remember bird flu.
Where they kind of talked about it like, oh, that was something that happened a couple of years ago. And so that's one of the reasons why we said we'll use this as a thing. I'm like, hey.
Baby flu.
Yeah, well, birds carry SARS viruses. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Wow. Nice pickup.
Yeah, very nice. So I think even like there's definitely was it you, Shane, who said there was a lot of big data dumps, which I actually didn't mind so much, like helping an audience of the time who hadn't been exposed to these kind of like ideas. And that was fine, but I came away after the whole book going, wow, that whole setup would have been much better as a mystery box built into the mission to Jupiter. If you made that the mystery box, the guys didn't know, and they were all like, Hal knew it, but the guys didn't know it, and there was like clues, and they were trying to unpack that, and it kind of happened a bit where he kind of like that would have been so much more compelling. So that's my structure idea, is you don't show that, you just you basically go from the dawn of man to now you're actually running around. But that was my thought.
I certainly think if you were to write it today or produce the movie today, that's probably how you go about doing it.
Yeah. But I get it for the time, and it was there. Like I think Lisa's point about it going, he's looking at the moon to going to the moon, that jump through the solar system. I get it from a structural point at the time. The other thing I just wanted to share before I throw it out to everybody else is I was looking up the whole Velcro slippers thing. Because I was like looked it up, and there were people who were basically like saying, oh, they talked about it, why do we not do that? And they were like, because it actually doesn't make any sense, because you're actually having to put more effort into trying to balance to pull it's great to kind of in this the effect that they were trying to show that makes sense to like how do you fake it. Saying that, I think they faked it really. There was a nice faking of weightlessness in the Discovery One scene, but it was really funny reading people going, it's just no, like how ineffective. It's much more effective to just propel yourself off things. So anyway, I just wanted to share that was like the thing of it makes people feel better if they know there's gravity, which I thought was hilarious.
I think in the movie it's like, I was watching it going, yeah, I can see why they did this because, modern movies you can use CG, or there's even examples where they've actually gone up into one of those planes that does the
vomit
loop
comet,
thing
yeah.
and actually had weightlessness to film. Well, they couldn't do that back then, and I think they actually did a very good job considering the film.
And they didn't know. Like, that's the other thing. They didn't know what it was going to be, like to be spending time in space, and the idea of a payload, the amount of weight being in a payload to that being important. And so the space of like going, well, if there's no up or down, then you make the most of every space you have on all foot. Like, that idea just was foreign. So I liked that, kind of having this analysis of my brain going, oh, it's so interesting, of like what we knew tech wise, and so what we felt comfortable with versus what we now understand. So I thought that was interesting.
I think I do think some of the overshoots also are attributable to Clark trying to frame it as not as a one-off mission, but as a regular transport system. So I mean the Earth to station to Moon transports, both of them are supposed to be mass passenger transports, but not just carrying one person normally. It just happens to be, because of the circumstance, they're only carrying Floyd. And so they're very much framed in that context. Like, how do you deal with people who've never experienced weightlessness in space?
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
And it's little things like that, but I think he was trying to get away with. Whilst there isn't a lot of practicality to it, based on what we know now, there's definitely an issue of having to teach people to deal with realities of weightlessness, how to maneuver in it, because it's not a natural thing.
I love the microphone drop. I'm just going to throw that in there. When the astronauts come back from the ISS, having done heaps of interviews whilst on the ISS, they typically in their first few interviews drop their microphone.
That's right. Yes.
Because they're like, oh yeah, I'll just grab that. Oh,
I see. Because they've got news. Sorry, I thought you meant like mic drop as in I'm done here. Boom.
Oh,
that's what you meant.
Yeah, and they're like, mic float.
Yeah, Elvis out. That's what I thought you meant. I like the mic drop, and I was like, what?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, when you think about the context as well, timing wise, like, this is the first. This was a earlier attempt to show moon travel, than the real deal. I mean, I was checking up the timing as well earlier today, and the movie and the books the movie screened before the first successful orbit of the moon, before Apollo 8 actually succeeded. So it really was something that people were thinking about. This was a thing that was going to happen, but it hadn't actually happened yet.
When I read the book in 2001, I remember appreciating the data dumps, all the explanation about it a lot more than this time. This time it was like, yeah, get on with it. But in 2001, when I was, we weren't anywhere near as advanced in, travel, and
there were some interesting where he didn't miss the mark. He had a digital tablet, so Floyd was using a digital tablet. He missed the mark on he talked to an IP address. I remember reading this and I was thinking, oh, you sweet summer child, where he's like, oh, he had to remember the number for that. He's like, and it like remembered. I was thinking, I was like, oh, it's so interesting, the whole idea of there being like usability and like what makes it easier for a user was just sort of foreign. And I thought that was he's gotten that bit. And then there was a bit that Floyd said about there was two things. There was clickbait headings that he was like, and I was like, well, nothing's changed. And the other thing was, he says, oh, with everything that's available, it could take a lifetime to read. I'm like, oh, yep, you got that one right as well. So I was like, oh, he had the digital tablet. He had the idea that this is how you would get your news. I thought the IP address was definitely something that I believe would exist because the internet was in its infancy, wasn't it? From the military in the late 60s.
probably existed in some form.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the thing about it is, when I read it,
Oh,
I didn't take it as you're saying IP address. He just says address, which
Address, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
he says numbers. He says the number.
Alyssa might have more insight in this. You want to say?
No, not really.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
one thing I did notice is that they have like video phones now, but they didn't tie them with the PCs. They, still had them as separate
Little boot.
landline.
Yeah. Interesting. Blade Runner was the same, if you might recall, which was like filmed in like the 80s, is that they had the video phones. Again, like this idea, like Kirk is wandering around the Starship Enterprise in the 60s and 70s with a handheld device, and it never occurred to them that might be like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so
Could also
interesting.
be the tricorder.
Ooh, let me run to the phone.
And
I'll put down
the
my
chart,
PC.
I don't think this is in the book, but it was in the movie where he did the phone call with his daughter, and then it's like charge $1.70, and I was like, from the moon, that's not that bad.
No, it wasn't the moon. It was the space station. Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
But still, that's a lot from in 1968.
oh,
Yeah,
Yes.
but I mean,
Oh,
Actually-
yeah.
I actually have a pull quote from that part of the book, which I will share because I
Yeah.
laughed at it when I read it. This is when Floyd's reached the moon. The administrator suite was only 15 feet square, but it managed to contain all the fittings and status symbols of the typical $50,000 a year head of a department.
Bless your heart.
Nice.
So funny.
The
Yeah.
the idea of the credit card though was quite good. Because credit cards, I can't remember when credit cards first came in the form of a plastic card, but for a long time they were just like you click clacky machines, and the stripes didn't really come in until I think it was early to mid 80s was when they first started trying them. And he just pops in the machine and it knows, and it's like it's like those little things that it's like, yeah, that's actually pretty much still how it works. I mean, a lot of us pay.
I was going to say, now it's on our device that Kirk had.
Yeah, exactly, right?
one of the things that stood out to me was they said something along the lines of like the Earth's population had gone up to 6 billion people and there was no more food left, and I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
it's a
I
bit
think
more than that now, and
Yeah.
and then
Well,
it's like, I mean, there isn't enough food, but it's just certain people are getting food and other people are not.
Yeah.
How has that changed?
The other thought I had about tech, and this is not, I guess, necessarily specific to this book, but I think to a lot of books, particularly of that era, is that I think a lot of people generally have the concept of in the future there will be digital versions of things, like, there's newspapers and there's this and there's that, whatever. But I think the biggest thing that almost no one kind of really anticipated was just how pervasive the internet would get. It's not a thing that you would just interact with here and there in a specific circumstance.
Yeah.
Just how much a part of everyday life it is, and every aspect of it now.
Yeah, like you work in it. Like that's where you go to work. Yeah. Online or using
it's always on. You don't have to go like, I'll just go and do blah to get my.
But that's even even me from the 2001, the turn of the century, that wasn't actually the way it was. I think we still had dial up.
Yeah, please don't call me or you'll disconnect my internet. So
right. So
when Matt and I met on the internet in 99?
No, it was earlier than that.
98?
Probably 98.
And it was dial-up, and I remember being excited to talk to him and trying to do the dial-up, and it would dial and then not connect and dial and not connect, and I'd be like, fucking god damn it, because I'd emailed him yesterday and said I'll be online at this time, because that was back when you didn't get 24 hours internet. You paid for a certain number of hours per week, and you had to ration your hours. And
I remember being in like a shared house and be like, don't use the phone, I'm using the dial-up.
I picked up
the phone.
I didn't have internet the entire time. I was in London until 2000. So I went in 2002 and I was there until, when was it, 2007? And I never had, this is the thing that I think that people forget. The first iPhone, we had WAP phones, but that truly that was 2007 when that came out. It was actually really late into the century. It was the same year that YouTube came on, right? So what we think is so like, has been around, and in a way it has been around a long time. We're coming up to 20 years, but it's not as long as our lives we think of, if that makes sense.
What you're saying is we're old. Thank you,
Now
Sam.
I'm confused.
Sorry.
On the computer technology and communication side of things. So let's remember that he gave himself a 40 Windows, a roughly 40-year look ahead. He was only projecting to 2001, not all the way up to where we are now. Now, I mean, information pervasiveness, he kind of got right, kind of got wrong. Like, so he talks about news pads constantly updating. Getting new dumps every hour, which is something that's very much a continuous networking or continuous communication environment is. And that's not too far for truth. And certainly we had that in 2000. So whilst domestic internet was limited to dial-up because at least it was in Australia, because Australia didn't have pervasive digital phone systems, there were parts of the world where it was. So you look outside of Australia, you look at the US and Europe, where there was a much higher uptake of ISDN, for instance. This is before ADSL. ISDN services, typically in their smallest deployment, to residential or anyone else, was 2 lines. Always 2 lines. And so these people could have a permanent data session running parallel with a voice call. They weren't forced to pick that way like we were here, and we were stuck here because Telstra we went, no, this is just a phone service. We'll charge it like a phone service, and did. ISDN in Australia was so incredibly expensive up until the very late 90s when they finally switched to the European standards, and even then it was still pretty bad. That no one used it except businesses.
Shane and I met on the internet in '93, and we were talking almost constantly. But he was using. I mean, we were both on the EDU network, which would have been,
Yeah, and we look at what the university was using in the 90s. They were using the serious stuff when nobody else could. I mean, I was at ANU in '99.
But this was '93.
Yeah, and so that's quite a bit further forward. But in '99 they were running ATM networks over fiber across the entire campus backbone, which was nobody but the big corporates would run something like that.
Yeah,
and the universities were using it.
Yeah.
So apparently the ARPANET was developed around '66, but didn't go into use until '68 or '69. So the book preceded, the writing of it preceded stuff like, if he had done the research, he might have known about like TCP packets and stuff like that. But I don't think we had the idea of like IPE. I mean, we might have just started that.
I guess I was just kind of putting it together, the idea, because I guess my guess is you have phone numbers and they have digits, and that's what people would be remembering. So he was like, well, it would be the same thing if you were phoning a newspaper, and so I've remembered the number for it. And what I'm saying, what I was going to is like, it's kind of not too far off, because we do have an address that is numbers. It's just that we put over the top, like we have.
And it almost makes sense that it would be the only way to do it, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
And it also makes sense, actually. That actually is what we had. Like before the internet was popularized, we were basically using circuit switch data. So if you wanted to talk to another party, you established a phone, basically a data circuit, which is different to a phone circuit, by using a station number.
Yeah.
It's a pretty natural progression. That's what we actually did do.
It wouldn't surprise me at all, too, if Clark was hanging out with the developers of DARPANET, or at least encountering them in fandom spaces and hearing about it at con.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, geeks, data people, physicists, you mean like we're into sci-fi? No? Anyway, so I also just wanted to double check. Can I double check something? Because I thought, am I nuts? Am I not nuts? So Clark says in this that the moon is not wasn't formed from Earth.
Yeah, that's
he said that, right? And I sat there going, I thought it was partially Earth because
Yeah,
it
it's
got
half
knocked
Earth.
off and then fought, like it's partially the meteorite that hit Earth as well. Like so that was because, but he said we've known about that for ages, and I was
Well,
going
that was a prevailing theory at the time.
right at the time.
Yeah,
They thought it
at
was
the
a
time, though.
satellite that had been sucked in, like one we caught.
That was
Right.
before they'd put people up there to get samples from the moon, though, right?
And then went, oh, it's us.
Yeah. Oh, it's just another bit of Earth. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, crap. There's nothing exciting here. It's just more of the same. Okay.
There's nothing
I thought I was
exciting.
going
Let's
nuts,
just
and I had to
Newton's-
Google that. And I was
Let's
like,
do Newton's
I'm pretty
experiment
sure
by
I'm right.
dropping a hammer and a feather instead.
That was pretty cool. Yeah, what are any other thoughts about Mission to the Moon? Especially, you know, I think that it's interesting reading between seeing the movie. That for me was kind of, there was very much, they were running on the same track, but kind of sometimes it was like this and sometimes it was like this. Any other thoughts?
I definitely found the movie, and my recollection is, you know, the movie and the book are very disconnected over that chapter. They're both trying to achieve the same thing, but the way they go about it is you know, very different in terms of level of explanation and pace.
Mm.
Oh, are we talking about Mission to the Moon or Mission to Jupiter now?
Yeah.
No,
Mission
Mission to the Moon. I just want to see if
okay.
there's any, before we moved on, I want to see if there's anything anybody else had to comment on.
Yeah, our 10-year-old friend was not that clever. I asked him how they did the filming of the people walking sideways against gravity, and
Mhm.
he didn't really realize that you could rotate a camera.
Well, actually, it wasn't the camera rotating. It was the hallway it was attached to. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a mix.
Show him Inception and blow his mind.
Now, on the tech and introducing the audience and so on, I saw just recently a YouTube video of an astrophysicist reacting to The Expanse, and she was watching when they cut power and use their magnetic boots to connect to the deck or started floating, and she's like, why are they turning off the artificial gravity when they cut? And she could not figure out through the whole video. She just automatically assumed that tech comes with artificial gravity at some point.
Yeah.
But there must be some physics maneuvering reason why you don't want to use it next to. That doesn't make sense.
She didn't realize
That's
that.
one of the things
It's like
that I
our
love
world.
about The Expanse is that it's like it makes so much sense. You know,
Yeah. It's a world they haven't embedded in artificial
travel at
gravity.
1G, so you get 1G of gravity, but then when you're on the float and you have stopped
While you're doing the flip.
gravity,
Yeah.
There's no gravity because you're not making thrust. One of the comments, nicely or fairly, to the YouTuber said, like, we don't have anything that will provide constant thrust of 1G for like these huge burns. So that's fairly reasonable that she wouldn't be assuming it. But
I feel like
just love the
as far as the
completely
conceit goes,
skipping over the idea of thrust like obviously you've got artificial gravity. What's going on?
Yeah, like that's what I was going to say. Like, it's less of a mental leap for me to figure out that they worked out some kind of engine that can travel at 1G constantly. That's less of a mental leap to me than we invented some nebulous artificial gravity, like Star Trek style.
Yeah,
like,
We're
And
under
she
constant
instantly-
thrust. I can get my head around that. Yeah.
And she instantly got what they were doing with pouring in a orbiting
The Coriolis effect.
The Coriolis effect. She explained that perfectly. It just,
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
I might be dragged away to walk the dog in a moment.
There were children. There were children on the moon. The new generation of skinny, thin, gravity.
That's just wrong on so many levels. So
And he got that one very wrong.
Yeah. And I also
a very unhealthy child. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, like that part was I was like, wow, okay, no.
Yeah. Did we know about radiation at that time? No.
Yeah.
So we didn't
we didn't realize
how bad it can be if you do not have any.
We knew about radiation and how bad it could be. I don't think we knew about how much radiation was out in space.
That's the question I've
didn't
got.
realise
Sorry, I didn't explain myself.
We did
Very limited understanding of that.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki were in the 1940s, so we knew a lot about radiation.
Sorry, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't.
But
I didn't.
background.
I didn't add.
No, you meant
it was.
Space.
The space.
We didn't know how
Space
much-
radiation.
We didn't know how much cosmic radiation humans
Yeah.
get exposed to as soon as they leave our beautiful, safe little atmosphere and magnetosphere.
Ooh.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
didn't,
yeah.
they didn't even know for a while, like some of the first astronauts, they were talking about like why they were getting they were like seeing stars, like white flashes in their eyes, and
Yeah.
they couldn't explain it until it turned out it was like, hey, it's actually really high energy cosmic rays that you're getting blasted with. So
Wow, I
That's
didn't know that. I didn't know they got that. Jesus.
Every
Yeah.
every
gonna
20
duck it.
seconds or so, they get a when they're in this.
Might be back.
See,
Mel-
Shane,
oh,
Jesus. Oh, he's going.
I don't know if he's
He's going
going.
with dogs.
That's to walk the
Oh.
dog.
He's coming back.
Okay.
What was we talking about? Yes. So yeah, the kid on the moon, which interestingly was in the book, but they did a swap in the movie and put the kid on the television. Like, so they need to have a kid at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, the television, like the chat. It was so, and that always felt very weird to me because it serves absolutely no purpose except to show a video phone.
Yeah.
Because like, there's no point to that conversation.
I think that's
Him
actually
being
the
a
point.
family man is completely inconsequential.
I did think it was a very realistic
No,
conversation with a kid, though. Like, you quite often get conversations with kids in TV shows or movies where they're like having a proper conversation. Whereas the kid was like, yeah, like, I don't know, and hardly answering. And I was like, yeah, that's actually pretty right.
No, the point of that was definitely commoditized communication. Like the fact that he's having a real-time communication with a child, with his child, from the moon, from the moon or from the space station.
Yeah, and
it's
but that's what
not a big
that's what I mean. It's not important to. Yeah,
but you're right. It was cool to see a real communication between parent and child. Like, yeah, this is more real.
You say that. I think it's actually important for the framing of what comes next, and with their constant communication and discussions with mission control. Because if you don't, because you got to, again, this is not something that would have been thought about at the time.
Right. So you think it was a framing device? So when we got to the Discovery one and they're talking, which again, there'd be a delay, right? This is something probably they didn't quite calculate because it was pretty. It did seem like recorded messages, and in Clark's version, they definitely are. He knew about the time delay.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing a bit of movie magic by Kubrick was like.
No, I think Kubrick actually played it mostly straight.
He did. So they look like recorded messages. They did, didn't they? They were like
He never, they never directly communicate. It's always the reply comes back and they watch the reply.
Yeah. Okay, that's all good.
In the movie, they go to Jupiter, though, isn't it? Isn't it set on
That's right.
Yeah,
it's set on Europa or something.
Yeah.
It's not
They couldn't do a convincing Jupiter at the time.
Other way around.
Convincing Saturn.
They couldn't do a convincing Saturn. Yeah. And I have to say, I've watched 2010 and Jupiter does look spectacular in that. They've done an amazing job in the background. Lithgow's in it. I just always remember that scene, and it is spectacular. So so let's talk about the mission to Jupiter on the Discovery one. And I also, like, if anybody else listened to Arthur C. Clarke talk about the naming conventions, and like, I'm listening to this going, fuck, they used all your names. Like, they've named all of these ships and robots. Like, I mean, it's not too far-fetched to call something the Discovery or the Explorer or the Endeavour, or what else did we have? They had one of the shuttles or something. So there was another one. Yeah.
Wait, are you talking about the actual space shuttles?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the naming convention at the Discovery, which we've got like on Mars, I think we had the Discovery, right? That was one of the
space shuttle that was Discovery.
Yes.
Yeah,
we had the space shuttle Discovery.
Endeavour,
Columbia,
Challenger,
Enterprise.
There was
That's
another
right.
spacecraft that that was the same name as one that was real. I think it might have been the one that he took up to the moon. What was that one called in the book? Because I feel like that was actually a spacecraft too. But
Atlas, I think it was.
No, it's not that then. There was another one besides Discovery that was in the book that I was like,
the one from the space station to the moon.
Oh, that one, the small. Yeah,
was it Atlas?
I think it's Atlas. And there is.
That's not the one I was thinking of then. But yeah, there was a couple that I was like, oh yeah, that exists.
Funny.
And I mean, the space pods had names too, but that was
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that was offensive.
Yes. Yes, which is why we're going to get to it. So let's talk Mission to Jupiter. So as I said here, it's more than half of the novel in the film. Like intermission happens after you get to this, and this takes up the big part of it. My main note on this was a lot of busy work in this until I get into the other parts I enjoyed. Like I said here, a lot of busy work, recording a press release, not informative, does not have an impact on the plot. like it was just, I was sitting there going, I remember listening to that because there was already stuff happening. I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, why are we listening to them? Oh, we're here on this. I was, oh my God. And then I've talked to sexism. So I said here, the author has not considered, or maybe they did consider and thought it would be unlikely, considering it was the 1960s, that women could be part of a crew. Unfortunately, this definitely has truth in regards to the US space program, because we were all horrified to find out that the first female astronaut wasn't until the late 80s, which is really, really shit.
Mhm.
What else did I say here? However, I also think it's interesting reading that he wrote Rendezvous with Rama after this, because there is definitely women in that, and I think that some of what was happening in the feminist movement at the time and the civil rights movement, because he wrote, so Rendezvous with Rama, I think, came out in 72, 73, and I think that has started to, like, maybe someone had called out his kind of unconscious or conscious bias around this and said, and I wrote something at the top, which I just wanted to read out to you guys before we talk to chapter 22 and what happened there. This book is of its time. The expansive thinking, from sci-fi is in terms of the science, not in terms of society and culture. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of the sci-fi that we have all been drawn to in this group isn't just around science, but also around, what does, like, we all love Becky Chambers, and she really thinks about what a society and culture could be like in evolved into the future and that type of thing. So I think that is also interesting and kind of like, it's kind of, wait, how do like, what was the one we read? The one in the cold. It was cold all the time.
David yeah. I can't remember.
Sorry, that's but we were in the snow. That's the thing I always remember. What was that one we were tempting?
Left Hand of Darkness?
Yes.
Oh, that's one I didn't read. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because it is science fiction, but it's absolutely challenging in terms of society and culture. And I just thought it's kind of like, oh, it's interesting what bits kind of interest people. I listened to the audiobook. So at the point where the person says, oh, we named the pods, I don't know, I can't remember the names, Betty, Allison, or whatever, after women because they're unpredictable. I audibly did this.
Yes. And
did anybody else do that?
I was more like, I'm not surprised by this because.
And I'm ever so grateful the movie didn't stoop to that.
Yeah.
If you remember the movie, the pods are numbered.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty. Yeah. I was just like, oh my God.
See, my reaction was more like, yeah, that'd be right. Maybe I'm too cynical.
Yeah, I gave Arthur C. Clarke a death stare in his deathbed. I was like, oh, how dare you!
I think the cynicism is definitely warranted. So, I mean, of course, you mentioned the female presence in Rama. Rama 2 onwards were co-written, and they feature a female lead character, and are probably better written than most of his other things in terms of character stories. But I think it's definitely because it was co-written and not Clarke on his own.
I I will say about the going back to before we talk about the sexism, the mundane stuff. I mean, I think he was leaning heavily on this is actually what it's like for astronauts. Like,
Right. Yeah.
It's like they do have all this day-to-day annoying routine stuff and these really inappropriate, insensitive expectations on press release, like, hey, we're weightless here dealing with XYZ and in a thing that could blow up, but you want us to do an upbeat press release.
Yeah,
okay.
like I suppose I don't mind that, but there's a point where you just fade to black. Like we had to sit through
it. To be fair, I think there's actually one important press device in there, and that's the interview with Hal.
I did. That was fine. I had no problems with that. It was the part after, and we'd already had some clues at that point, and then we started and I was like, I don't care. I want to know what's going on with that part now. This is So that was a criticism of it, but I thought that it's interesting. I was like, this is the chapter, the section where. I said Clark surprised the shit out, and this is kind of what I want to talk about. Clark surprised the shit out of me. He was, with the compassionate way he described Hal's emotional turmoil and desperation. I didn't leave this feeling like Hal was evil, just someone, an entity who was built up to be perfect. So when they weren't, they really struggled with that truth, and having to lie. And this entity, AI, didn't know how to cope, and this was the case that Hal's backstory was actually important. Nobody else's backstory was important, but his backstory was it actually was like, this is the reason Hal made these decisions, and these are the consequences. And I think this was the bit for me that I enjoyed. Like, I really love that part in the movie, and I think this is like obviously, but in the movie, because it is more ambiguous and you don't understand that, there is this kind of, you're with Dave more.
Yeah.
Until he's starting to, unattach him, and then you're trying to get a bit more of that understanding. But in this, it was just like, I was actually really moved by this artificial intelligent entity who was just desperate to like there was this bit that Clark wrote about Hal didn't know that you could be turned back on, because he don't. Why would it? Because everything he's been taught is about, it's been taught is about death, and that humans just die and don't come back. Why would it be any different for them? So I really enjoyed that, and I was actually very emotionally affected by that journey, and that what happened in that. So
I think this is one of the things that I liked about the book. I got Hal's motivations in the book, whereas in the movie I didn't. I was just
more
that trope of the AI that goes wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, they made him keep this secret. And it fucked with his head.
Yes.
And then he made a mistake, and he was like, well, I don't make mistakes, so I need to fix.
And they built him up to think he's perfect again. Like, there was that day where they kept saying that, and that makes it was like, oh, we've never made a mistake, he's perfect, there's never been an issue. Whereas, I mean, again, in time, we know that computers, everything's been built by a human, so the culpability of a human is always going to be inherent in anything that we create, including our algorithms and our AI, right? So
well, the movie, so interestingly, that mystery around Hal isn't in the movie series. It's the second movie where that's clarified.
Which
which is not, it's not in the it's not in the in the book. They actually give it to you, which is really And
sorry, Cresco.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the delivery of it in the book actually helps frame it better in this for the second Odyssey 2, when they actually make the decision to actually try and reinstate Hal. Because without that realization, why would you want to reactivate a possibly psychotic computer?
I had a lot of trouble reading this section because I knew about the impending deaths, and just like there's a point where it's like, I don't really want to read this anymore. And went through that and went on. I mean, I had to have Shane tell me, no, Frank doesn't die the first time he goes out. You can read the section.
Yeah.
Shane's got your back.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
rough.
I mean the whole sequence is quite different in the book as well. Like,
Yeah, it's very quick. He turns Hal off like in
Yeah.
2 pages,
The
whereas I
se-
remember
well,
the movie was like,
The
more than
sequence in the movie, like when I watched it the first time, I was crying a lot for Hal.
Yeah.
And Hal in desperation pleading with Dave not to shut him down.
Yeah.
yeah,
But none of that backstory comes out, whereas it
finally
does in
confessing,
yeah.
like, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Because Hal doesn't know that it says he's never slept, so he didn't know he could wake up.
Yeah, it's really upsetting. It was really upsetting, and and I'm glad of that. So that, to me, having gone through that in this book, I was like, Arthur C. Clarke, you're perfectly capable of this character work. You just don't choose to do it as often. I don't know. Like, I really felt like this, and I think I wrote something down here. I said these two characters of Dave and Hal, like that's the crux of this whole thing. That is, and this, like, now I think an author would really build it around that. And I actually wrote down and ended up doing, I said, I need to cleanse with Project Hail Mary. So I went and did that because I was like, right, I have to go listen to this.
The way he turns off Hal, I'm not actually sure that Hal would have been able to wake up in the same way. It wasn't like he had the technology to just, let's back you all up and then we'll bring you back to this spot.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was a murder.
Yeah, and the way it's certainly framed and what I recall of it, it is because like the procedure he uses is not the benign one. This is the the last resort severance one, and which is why there's such a big affair in 2010 with actually having to rehearse the process to reinstate Hal.
Yeah,
it's not just something they can go put back
that's right.
together
He
again.
rehearses it with the Sal 1500, doesn't he?
With the alternate system they have back on Earth.
Yeah.
But I can see where this, like, with my modern communication lens on, I can see where this all went wrong. Here are people discussing what's going to happen to you without you being involved in that discussion.
Yeah.
They did not involve at any point, like, invite him to watch it, and say, oh, what do you make of all of this? Or just sort of like how this is addressing how, and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to keep these bits and kind of reboot that, but we want to keep. So Dave,
hang on. To be fair, they're actually frightened of Hal at this point.
No. I'm talking about the message that comes from Earth.
Oh, right.
They're not addressing Hal at any point in that. They're talking to Bowman and Paul. They're not talking to Hal and saying, like, reassuring that entity. They're saying, oh, this is what you're going to do. They're discussing,
That is actually lampshaded. He even goes straight on to say when they finally talk about the cause that even his designers hadn't considered the nature of its personality. And the fact that it would be susceptible to this. And they managed to induce the same psychosis in their Earthbound system.
Yeah.
They had to put into therapy.
Yeah.
So I think plot wise that's actually justified because, like I said, he actually points out the error that leads to that.
Yeah. I just want to fix people's relationships in retrospect.
Have you read the second book?
No, but I watched the movie.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it very much. And
In terms of, you might, if you want to repair the relationship, you might want to read the second book. I'm just putting it out there.
And the third.
Yeah.
And the third.
I think I'm okay. But overall, I don't know what I enjoyed this. It's interesting. Here's the tension at last. Here's the tension. Here is the conflict and the tension and the push and the pull and the motivations and the consequences. And it took us till now to get there. So we got there. So, yeah. And same thing. And I liked the science that got shared as well. I thought that was really cool. I don't know if Shane's back online. I'd love to know what he thought of the hard science shares in that, because I actually did enjoy those aspects. So anybody else got thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that. So I mean, a lot of that I think was done, was done reasonably well and very forward thinking, like the use of EVA pods. No one had thought about long distance travel. I don't. The lunar lander may have been a thought at the time. But the pods are certainly more versatile than the lander ever was.
Disturbed me how untethered they were in their spacewalks. Why?
Oh, no.
And
He's
how far
tethered.
away, and I think this is probably a movie thing, how far away they parked the pod from the place where they needed to repair, and then they just jumped out and just hoped that they lined it up right. And I was like, no.
No, Frank tethers himself to the pod.
In the
So,
movie,
in
it
the
was
movie,
like a big jump out into nothingness without a tether on, and
sorry, yeah.
and it wasn't it was like, so you're just hoping that you angled that right.
I'm just gonna say Kubrick probably didn't read the cliff notes there.
Maybe, yeah.
There's also the fact that the spaceship is traveling, and they take the pod out to go and retrieve him, and he's traveling away from a spaceship that's traveling at what pace? And he's traveling in a pod away from it. He's somehow going to catch up with that coming back. I'm like,
Yeah, because you've got the same thrust.
as long as Discovery's coasting, so yeah, he could do
it's
it.
not under constant thrust.
No, it's a coaster.
Yeah, okay, that's right. That's right. That's why they have to have a centrifuge. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, the plasma engines only fired for its initial acceleration, or the slingshot, and for the deceleration. The rest of the time, it's coasting.
But it's still traveling at a serious pace, though.
Yes, but this is in a microgravity, so the motion
the
of the
pod
pod
will
is
be
relative to Discovery.
To Discovery, yeah.
As long as he doesn't get captured by another gravity, he's fine.
Assuming a lot with the maneuvering that he doesn't slow down at any point during all of that, but
the thing about it is, I said everything's relative, including Frank's movement.
So
you think of to do the mental gymnastics, because it's not, because you can safely assume that the distance involved is small enough that gravity will be constant over the entire duration of the exercise. You can say Discovery is your 0 point. That's the null point, and everything's relative to Discovery. The scale is small enough and the universe big enough that works.
Sorry, can you say that again? I was distracted on.
Oh, sorry. We're talking about the realities of doing an EVA to chase after Frank Poole.
Right.
And the fact that, because Discovery isn't accelerating, Discovery is coasting at that point. That you could, go on an EVA, in the pod and go chase after the body and bring it back, because the whole system, the Frank, Discovery, and the pod are already initially accelerated to the same velocity.
Velocity, yeah, and they're in constant coast. Yeah. Shane, you're back from walking the dog.
I am.
What were your thoughts on Mission to Jupiter?
I don't think I've had anything particularly profound. I think Frank Poole's pod was just under full acceleration and staying under full acceleration.
We're talking about the book, not the book, sorry, the movie, where the pod movie doesn't drag him out into.
Fair.
I also just meant generally. What were your thoughts?
No, I know. I don't think I have anything particularly profound.
I don't know if you had any thoughts about Hal and Bowman and no.
I'm sure nothing novel.
Anything else anybody wants to speak to? Okay, let's get on to the last section, rebirth. Okay. I really enjoyed this section. I think there's a couple of people who've read Rendezvous with Rama, and I feel like there was some of the ideas, like I just really felt he describes fantastical things. I think, Chris, you said he's very like the visual and it's in the fantastical. So he does a lot of that in Rama as well. So I just really enjoyed this. I loved the description of going to the negative space, the nebulas, the space car park was haunting. That was super haunting. Like, and then like you said, you don't get an explanation, but your mind goes, like with Bowman, you're like, are they, is that a graveyard? It's like all these people have jumped on, like it was very interesting. And the movie left out the great quote, which I know shows up in 2010, but I love that quote, my God, it's full of stars. And you don't get that in the movie. And I was very confused in the movie because you also don't, when I watched it, I was like, oh, no wonder I was so effing confused, because you see the monolith and then you pivot up on the camera for the starfield. And I never understood what the fuck was happening, whereas it's very explicit in the book that the monolith is a Stargate. And I was like, this all makes fucking sense now.
Yeah, same. Because I never got that.
I was just going to blame that on Kubrick. That's just pure Kubrick.
It's Kubrick. It looks really cool, everything in a line. And you can see the monolith. It looks really cool. But I'm like, why did you pivot? Anyway.
It's totally Kubrick, and at the same time, totally excusable, because how on earth do you
put the starfield in?
Or actually explain in film what is going on with the technology that you had in late 60s filmmaking.
Yeah. But I in the film then, when I was because I was watching that sequence again last night, I do love the whole the light slit technique. I remember watching that when I was 19 and going, wow. And then rewatching it a few times since, I'm like, God, I don't know if everyone here's seen the first Tron. Like, there's a lot of that. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. It was the same thing when Hal killed off the crew members and the screens. It's like Alien has the same thing. Like, there was no actual screen, so someone's actually making all of these light, like they're making them as lights and flashing stuff. Like, it's physical, and they're filming it, and it looks awesome. On
that note, like all of the all of the computer interface stuff in 2001 was so well done for the time in the movie. Like, just the visual stuff, the screen schematics,
the models are beautiful.
The visual styling of it all.
Yeah. Anyone noticed a little shout out to various companies in the movie?
Pan
Am and IBM.
Yeah, because I saw that, the Pan Am, because they flew Pan Am, didn't they? I was like, that didn't age well.
Yep. Oh, there's many things that didn't age well.
I know, but I always laugh because it's the same thing in Blade Runner, where there's, I think, Pan Am advertising that too, and they don't exist. So, anyway, I love this whole sequence. It's that true exploration of fantastical things. Rama does this really well, and honestly, Matt, I do think that if you're like, give it a go, because if you like First Contact stuff, it's a good one. And then when we got to Bowman, like being met by the entities in the hotel room and the stuff around that was, I think I said I understood so much of not just what was happening, but why it was that way, because we're hearing what the entities have done and why they're doing things. And then I thought there was just really good theming that I didn't understand, because it's not, you don't get it in the movie, doesn't have it, but in the book, basically Bowman's going through what Hal just went through. He's going backwards and like he's getting younger, and I thought that was such a really nice mirroring. And I was like,
I didn't even catch that. That's brilliant.
Isn't it brilliant? I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what happened to Hal. He's been Hal,
regression.
And I was like, and I actually wrote here, wow, what if Hal had been the one to go through the gate? What would the entities have made of him? Or right? I was like, God, it's so interesting, because so I was like, right. So this is one of the reasons, because it left me thinking in a good way. Like, you didn't give me all the answers, but you got me thinking about the possibilities, because they've done this with so many species and so many places. And that was my last thought was, wow, this is just like these godlike entities are like the opposite of what we're supposed to, like we tell ourselves as humans we're allowed to do, not to interfere. So I was like, oh, so interesting.
What about the Prime Directive? No.
Thank you, Prime Directive. I was like, what is it? There is a name for it, but yes.
It's just Star Trek.
Yeah, I know, but it's
Prime Directive is monstrous. Anyway.
What's the other people?
And besides, the aliens broke the Prime Directive 3 million years ago, or whatever, 300 million years ago.
Yeah.
They don't care about it.
Then they continue to evolve.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing that I thing that I guess I thought in the novel he did a really good job of was kind of like showing or telling that like just the gap in terms of 3 million years of technological advancement and what this, you know, race or races or, you know, they've evolved themselves, but over that time the kind of power they've been able to harness and the kind of stuff that they can do, I felt that was like, you know, really well kind of came across really well. It's like I'm going through a star right now, and it's like I don't even feel anything. It's like that's just like, and they're like, this is nothing for us, you know, whatever. We don't even do this anymore. It's like
We're not even corporeal anymore.
no,
Yeah.
very differently
We're just
now.
a super intelligent shade of the color blue.
Yeah.
I
But there's a sense of like kind of like a sense of awe there as well that I liked, because that's another one of my meeting the more advanced ones is I like that sense of awe that they get often when there's like, here's something that's just so far, like, you know, the whole thing about sufficiently advanced magic, right? But just like you go like, oh my God, I can't even begin to contemplate the level of anything required to do this. So
this is this is a bit what I'm when I was saying I love the scale of these and classic sci-fi, because we've been to the moon, we've been 3 million years ago, we've been very patiently through the rings of Saturn, and we're finishing up on practically on the surface of a red giant in a binary star system, because why the hell not? Because we're setting it in the cool stuff we know about.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
just gorgeous. I miss that in sci-fi.
So I've been trying to remember the gene that one of the brain genes that ended up duplicating at about 3.4 million years ago when we moved into Australopithecine. And it allows for more complex neurons. And it reduplicated again 2.4 million years ago when we became Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and again about 1 million years ago when we would have been, you know, the latest
Homo sapiens subspecies.
Homo sapiens subspecies, yeah, and
like Homo sapiens Neanderthals, Homo sapiens sapiens,
and Neanderthals all have the 3 duplications as well. But that was kind of the split. And I love that happened. It wasn't just a bigger brain; it's like a more complex because it's gene duplicated.
What gene is it?
It's called SRGAP2.
I was going to say, give us some letters and numbers now, Alyssa.
Right. I want to go and get a 4th one injected.
Yeah.
You would have to go back in time to when you were a cellular blastocyst and have it done then.
Worth it.
You could though.
Yeah, you're going to boom in this situation. Go back, become a star child.
Actually, it's also just reminded me of one thing that Clark got incredibly wrong, which was the rate of computer progress.
That's right, which is doubling every 5 years, right?
Well, at the moment, yeah, but
Yes.
But no, but his prediction that was like only the 3rd or 4th revolution to get up to the performance level to simulate neural networks and complex neural networks. And it's just like, yeah, you may be a few orders of magnitude off there.
Artificial intelligence is 20 years away.
Always 20 years away.
Always.
But artificial stupidity is right now.
Nice. What did Mel? What did you think of the rebirth sequence? Do you remember?
I found it considerably less creepy than the movie version of it.
Interesting, because you said that you didn't enjoy this as much as the movie and you felt it detracted. So
most of where it detracted was in the earlier stages. At the end, I'm not a massive fan of the ending in the book or anything on those lines. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, yeah, this was really good. I like the ambiguity of, this is the thing for me. Like, what I like about the movie is the ambiguity of it. Like, that you don't understand all of it, which is why the book didn't work for me, because I was like, stop filling in the gaps. God, I don't want your version. I like my version. So for me, that's why. So with the end bit, the main thing that I got from it really was that, the end bit I found really creepy at the time. Like the way, sorry, this is movie based rather than.
Yeah.
But the shots that they do from like him being almost in the room with himself.
Yeah.
Those are so very creepy, in a way of time skipping forward and things. And it's like, I found that the book was just a little bit more plain in that respects.
I would definitely agree with that.
I did like the explanations, though. It's like when he's looking at the media that the room supplied, and he's like, this room is in this movie they're showing me. That's where they're getting it. They just like picked up our, media from 3 years ago and recreated it. And
yeah, no, it was good. It was good. And it's just a set. Yeah.
And then he goes to sleep for the last time, which I didn't quite realize. But of course he would have died if he was in a Stargate or he was like in a Red Dwarf or something. It wasn't really clear where he was and whether his movement was actually through space or just an intellectual movement through whatever they were doing to him.
Yeah. I did understand that thing of sending him, because then that made sense about 2010. So Lisa will be able to.
I haven't seen that. You recommend it?
Yeah, because Bowman shows up in 2010 as a sort of sentient on the airwaves DJ. I don't know why I can kind of remember him. And then so I was like, when I read 2001, I was like, oh, well, this makes more sense than the space baby, that giant space baby that Craig Benzine calls the end. Yeah. Wheezy Waiter, giant space baby. And I'm like, yeah, and that is a very creepy giant space baby, but very well done for the time, but still,
And it's even in the book. Anyway.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean? Yeah. It was just a little bit like
and his little digital friend. The giant space baby and his little digital teddy.
But the other thing about the giant space baby, it makes sense that if they're trying to create him as a super intelligence, he'd have to go back to that point in time where he's that open to learning experiences.
Yeah.
A 33-year-old or however old he was at capacity.
And the book covers that quite explicitly, I thought.
I thought it was really good.
And very unambiguous about that.
Yeah. But it was also the why they, and it reminded me a little bit of what's his name? Who's the guy who sent Voyager?
Chakotay?
No.
Oh. Data? Wait, who
sent Real Life Voyager?
Real Life Voyager. Sorry, I should be clear.
The Voyager probes. Do you mean the Real Life Voyager probes?
Sagan, thank you.
Sagan.
Okay.
Oh,
Sagan.
right.
I've never read Contact, but I've seen the movie a couple of times and I've always really enjoyed it because it's your classic mystery box.
Don't do the book, it's very different.
Okay, but there's a quote at the end, and I'm not giving away too much, but where she basically it's first contact, and she says, like she's talking, and she's like, but why this? Like, why is that? And she said, and he says, this is the way we've found it's done. This is the way it's always been done because this is the way that works the best. And I felt like I don't know when that was written, but I felt like that was also kind of it fitted in nicely with what Clark had sort of explained from the entities, kind of going, we get you through to this point, and then you because this is the best way for you to become, a godlike. Anyway, it just felt. I was just reminded of that when I read that because I was like, oh yeah, it feels very in line and in sync with that Sagan's thought too. So I don't know when that was written. Maybe he was influenced by this. Who knows? I don't know.
I think it was definitely after this.
Yeah, I don't know how much.
I don't know
how long upstairs, after, but I don't want to go up and get it. Sorry.
I have in my hand.
I know. A device that you can look these things up with.
1985.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is that? I always love that. I'm going to say it again. That meme of going, explain a traveler from the past. The most confusing thing I hold in my hand access to all of the world's information, but I use it to get into arguments with strangers on the internet and look at pictures of cats. So true. Like that is really hard.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Exactly.
It's so true. It's like, really? You could do all that, but you do that.
Well, a friend of mine has a
you do this.
So, you're making me remember the scene in Iron Sky where the Nazi scientists discover the phone.
I've never seen that.
It's a very funny film. That is...
Yeah, you've got to take it very tongue in cheek because that's the way it's meant to be viewed.
Right.
Yeah, the Nazis who've been hiding on the moon, finally meet a modern spaceman who's got a smartphone.
Oh, okay, right.
I haven't seen it. I think I need to see that movie.
It's
what's it called? Iron Sky?
Don't take it seriously, but it's got some really funny scenes in it.
It sounds like Dr. Zhivago kind of don't take it seriously kind of thing.
Yeah, you can't take it even remotely seriously.
No, Nazis. I've heard a lot about it, so I'm thinking maybe I have seen it.
You'll have
Nazis.
to come over and watch it if you haven't.
Oh no, it's actually trying to take itself seriously. Oh shit, I thought it was a comedy with the way you were talking about it.
No, it doesn't take itself seriously. It doesn't take itself seriously.
It doesn't? It is a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing.
Very tongue-in-cheek.
Phew.
Lunar Nazis. That sounds great. I will take you up on that offer, Chris. Thank you.
Cool. That's great. Thank you. Anything else that anybody wants to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so, actually.
Much better choice than I would have guessed a month ago before I started reading it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. I think it's always just really interesting to this is I love it when people pick a classic sci-fi because it's my push to actually read a classic sci-fi novel. Okay. And I really enjoyed the Left Hand of Darkness and being exposed to that. And when David chose that, was it last year or the year before? And there's just been I don't think I got to read the Eartha. Did we do one of the Sea Witch, Sea Witch?
Yes,
ones?
we did Earth Sea, the first one. Drew picked it.
Yeah, and I don't think I got to do it.
Oh, now I want to go. Now I want to. If you're talking about classic sci-fi, now I actually want to read War of the Worlds. So I've never actually
read War of the Worlds.
I think you shouldn't read it. I think you should go and find the radio play and experience it the way that it was originally broadcast.
Radio play? I think isn't that a recording of an actual event that occurred?
Okay, I think you should encounter it by watching Spaced Invaders, which was a very, very silly 1980s movie where some Martians get lost and hear the radio play, so they go invade Kansas, expecting to find the invasion tripods here.
Cute, very cute. Anyway, if that's all, we can finish up, I think. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for a great conversation, everybody. Really enjoyable.
And for next month, we are reading Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater.
Ooh.
Waiter. Yeah, no, water. Yeah.
Who's pick?
December's pick.
I think it was a boat.